Hi, everyone. My name is Nicholas Jackson, Senior Business Central Consultant here at Opal. And what I'm going to walk through today is a high-level overview of MEM, Multi-Entity Management, from a company named Binary Stream. So it is a third-party extension that is very popular and very common, especially with organizations that have multiple entities. We have quite a few clients using it. So, for example, we have one client who performs study abroad. They have lots of international organizations. We have another client who manages storage units. So they have lots of different entities. We have other clients that manage multiple locations for healthcare and for various purposes there. It's really powerful because it is able to easily manage multiple entities and really treat them as separate organizations where you don't get the ease of use with the native intercompany functionality with Business Central. So native Business Central does have intercompany functionality. So you can go into your environment, you can have multiple companies inside of a single tenant. However, it's a little cumbersome if you've ever used it. There's lots of company switching back and forth. You have to manage multiple lists. There are ways to sync them, but it's just kind of clunky. Creating new companies is kind of a headache. So if you have 20 different entities, each a separate legal entity that needs to have its own do to, do from, and things like that, MEM is a really good choice. So today, I'm going to walk through a quick demo of what the big features and big selling points of MEM are. MEM, multi-entity management, I'll be calling it MEM for the rest of the scenario or rest of the demo here. So what we're going to take a look at first is a little bit of the setup. So I'm going to assume you know a little bit about Business Central and how it works natively. And what we are going to walk through is first by taking a look at our dimensions. So dimensions are obviously one of the biggest things inside of Business Central. The ability to track many different areas of your organization with certain transactions and tag them accordingly. What MEM does is adds and overhauls your global dimensions. So actually, let's go over to global dimensions first. We'll look at the Gen Ledger setup. And what we'll see here, as we scroll down here, our global dimension 1 is a dimension called company. You can call it company, entity, whatever you're like, whatever makes most sense to you. Now, what MEM does is it overhauls this first global dimension and adds a lot of extra functionality on top of it. So when you install MEM, it's going to ask you which dimension you want to use as your entity. And for this reason, we recommend starting with a blank slate and an empty company just because it overhauls so much, and we'd be more than happy to help you with that. But what it does is, again, just sets global dimension 1 for your global as your entity dimension. And if we come over here and we look at our dimension list, you can see here we've got a company dimension. Over to the dimension, and we'll take a look at the dimension values here. And for this one, we've got just a handful of different dimension values listed. We've got 5 entities or 5 companies, essentially. And so what this is the equivalent of would be having 5 separate Business Central environment, or 5 central Business Central companies, but instead we've got it all listed here as one company. Another thing MEM adds is this right here called MEM Entity Setup. When you're on your global dimension, you can select one of these and choose MEM Entity Setup. And this looks a lot like your company card that you have natively in Business Central, but this is for an individual entity. So you can do lots of different things related to a specific entity. Really, they're designed to be separate legal entities. So for each one of your dimensions here, you have a legal name, their own logo, their own tax ID number, their own email, homepage, their own addresses, things like that. You can have lots of different settings related to each one of your entities, basic shipping information or payments. You can have different number series all across the system for each one of your individual entities. There are some user-defined fields that you can set for each entity. 1099s, you can also manage 1099s separately for each entity or combine them up, however, which way you would like to manage it. So there's lots of different functionality related to each individual entity, and it's really like setting up your own company. So this is really powerful. You can see as we scroll through the list here, there's lots of different entities inside of this one Business Central company. It really makes it super easy to manage all of these different entities at once. So the process for creating a new entity or a new company is simply just adding another dimension value. There's a few other things that we can set up or that we would need to set up, but it really is as simple as adding another dimension value, and then it's available and ready to use. So the big thing that MEM adds on top of these dimensions here is the concept of intercompany. So as soon as you have multiple companies and they're doing business with one another, you're going to need intercompany. And natively, if you just used, there's nothing preventing you right now from spinning up a normal Business Central environment and adding a company dimension and adding your companies here. Well, you would lose the functionality of intercompany and restrictions between the different companies. So what we have here is if we go to MEM Setup, there is here MEM Intercompany Setup. And what this does is it asks you, okay, here's your originating entity, here's your destination entity or company. What are your due to, do froms for each one of these? So if we take our originating here, let's say New York, and our destination entity over here, again, these are just looks up to the dimension values, is Atlanta. You can see here, we've got many different due to, do froms for each one of our accounts between the 000 and the 100 company. So you can see here, they're actually all the same account. And that's something that we see very often, or actually they're separate. The due to from due to account name and due from the originating side, and then from the destination side, you'll see the same account. You can break it out into individual ones if you wanted to. We actually even have clients who will do it all inside a one GL account and just use dimensions to manage their due tos and due froms there. But this is a very common setup that you will see, where you would have these two be the same, these two accounts be the same as well. And it's simply just debits and credits. What is the balance of the account? And that is an easy way to manage your due to, do froms. So if we go take a look at the chart of accounts, we'll actually be able to see all of the accounts that are listed for your due to, do froms. All right. I'll scroll down here. For our see, there we go. MEM added these automatically, so they weren't in the list. They were towards the end with IC. So you can see here, there's one for each entity and due to and due from each one of the other entities. So this is a lot of GL accounts. We do often see this kind of consolidated into much smaller line amounts or much smaller number of GL accounts, but it's up to you. Whatever level of tracking you need, you have available. This is also set up so that you can have intercompany between really any two different entities. Now, what we do see often is we see often a parent-child relationship between entities. So for example, let's say there's one global headquarters, and then there's lots of other destinations. And the global headquarters is the one that manages your AP and manages your AR, and everything flows through that, and then just everything else gets allocated to your different entities. And we can absolutely set it up that way as well. There's some specific screens that we can set up to kind of organize your perform your org chart and create an org chart inside of MEM and have it allocate things accordingly there. And what we can do is we can block intercompany from your subsidiaries. So if every transaction needs to go through the parent company and your two child companies aren't going to do transactions directly with one another, then we can set the system up to do it that way as well. Another thing that you get with MEM is the ability to set security. So one of the nice things by using just one Business Central company is you have the ability to create just one list to manage your vendors, to manage your customers, to manage your chart of accounts. Everybody shares the same vendor list, the same GL list. Everything is the same for all customers or for all entities. However, there may be scenarios where certain vendors only apply to certain entities. Or let's say you've got somebody who is managing AP at a specific entity and you don't want them to see vendors from other entities. We have the ability to restrict which vendors are available for each entity, and we can set security to do that inside of Business Central. So if we wanted to say, okay, great, here is a specific vendor. We don't want them to be listed or available for any entity except for the one parent entity. We can do that. So if we go to MEM Setup, and then there is MEM, it is MEM Master Security. This is a nice list page and makes it really easy to set up. So basically, we're taking a look at an entity, and we can switch this to vendors, and we can look at a specific company code 000. So this is going to list all of our vendors, and it's going to ask us, okay, which vendors are allowed to be used in this entity? So we have an options here for mark or unmark all to quickly check each one of them. But if we wanted to block specific ones, we can check these boxes and say, great, these vendors cannot be used with this entity. We can go to the next entity and choose which ones. We can say this one, this, and this are not allowed for this company and run through the list. The other way that you can look at it is from a specific master record perspective. So if we're saying, okay, we're looking at a specific vendor, now we're looking at, okay, this is our first vendor in Fabricam. Only 000 can use them. We'll block it for each one of these down here. So they make it really easy to set up. And of course, you can bulk import this with Excel as well if you prefer to do that. So that's a bit of the background, a bit of the setup. There's lots of other features that you can do. There's lots of, really, MEM touches every part of the system. So this is just kind of the backbone, it's kind of the setup. Now I'm going to walk through a few of the demos. So how does this exactly play out? What does it look like keying a journal entry to create a purchase invoice? How does the intercompany set up? Now we'll run through that next. So that was a bit of the setup. Let's go through an example with taking a look at a general journal, for example. Come over here to general journals, and I've got a default batch listed here. Okay. Here are two transactions that I just went ahead and keyed as ahead of time. This is a very simple entry. Before we get to this entry, though, I do want to point out that we do have an additional field up here in our header, not just the batch name. We do have company code and allocation template. So by looking at the company code, we'll click these three dots here. Imagine this company code listing here is essentially a sub batch, if you wanted to call that. So in a given batch, we've got our default batch. Each one of their companies has its own batch, essentially inside of that one batch. Now, what this lets you do is have a large amount of transactions inside of one batch. They can get all approved at once. They can be intercompany, they can be non-intercompany, but it really segregates it out into each one of the companies. So I'm looking at 000. I'm going to be using that one a lot. We can imagine this is kind of the main parent entity. And here, this is a very simple transaction. Again, coming down here, looking at, we've got prepaid rent and rent leases, right? Pre-basic accrual entry. This is the amount listed here. And from a MEM perspective, the other thing that it adds is, it doesn't really add it. It just simply moves your company code over here. Again, it's a dimension. It works just like dimensions anywhere else in the system. We've got dimension code is 000, 000. The thing to remember is you will see all across the system, in MEM, you will see company code at the header, and you'll see company code at the line. If these two match, it is not intercompany. If these two differ, it does become intercompany. And I'll show you some examples of some intercompany transactions here in a little bit. But to keep things simple, this is very standard, right? We've got 000 at the top and 000 down at the bottom. This is not going to be intercompany. So to show you that, I'll choose post. I'll choose preview posting. And we can see, great, this is two GL entries. Very simple. We've got our credit, we've got our debit. Nothing too crazy here, all right? Now, if we wanted to make this intercompany, we could flip this from one company code to another. So we could flip this from New York to Atlanta. And we can go to post, choose preview posting here. And now we can see we've got 6 GL entries. Where do these 6 GL entries come from? Well, when we take a look at these GL entries, it's often helpful to look at it by grouping it by company code. So all that hits on the 000 side is your intercompany accounts. So you've got the debits and credits wash here on your GL for your intercompany account for 000. And then for 100, you've got 16100, and you've got your prepaid rent and your rent and leases, as well as your 2 intercompany accounts. So this one might not make an awful lot of sense. Let's switch this back to, let's say, company code here, and let's do company code down here. So if you want to do an intercompany journal entry, you can do that here. Set your company code one thing at the top, your company code down here at the bottom, and that will let you do either regular transactions or intercompany transactions. So journal entries, very similar. You're just going to have that company code that's going to swap up just a little bit. Next, probably maybe a little bit more common use case is going to be on a purchase invoice. So let's go over to sales, let's go over to purchasing. We'll create a purchase invoice. I'll create a new one here. First thing it's going to ask me, this is a new screen. When you create a new document inside of MEM, it's going to ask you which company you are creating it for. And the question you need to ask yourself is, which company is going to hold the AP? So where is the AP going to hit? And most of the time, if you have a parent company, that's what it is going to be. You can also set what this default is. So it's going to ask you each time, but you can set your default, and you can set your default company or default entity as a setting in MEM. So it's going to ask me for which company. I'll say 000. All right. And we'll go through. It'll ask for a vendor. Let's say I bought something from Fabricam. Come over here to my vendor invoice. Here's an invoice number I typed in. We'll come down here to the line section. This is a GL account. Let's say we bought some travel expenses, just filling in some information here. We'll say the quantity is $180. Great. So this is very simple. No intercompany, nothing like that. Very simple AP. We'll choose, let's hit post, preview posting. And we'll see, again, 2 GL entries, vendor ledger entry, nothing too crazy here. Now, a very common scenario would be, let's say we, as the parent entity 000, is going to take the AP, but the expense itself actually needs to sit on another entity's books. Well, to switch this to make it intercompany, all we need to do is switch this to whichever company is going to take the expense here. Let's say Atlanta instead. Now, if we go to preview posting, we will see GL entries. There are now 4 GL entries. Again, sorting it by company code can be helpful. On the intercompany side for the parent entity, here we've got, it's going to be just our accounts payable and their intercompany account. Right? Nothing sits on the expenses for this entity. And then we've got intercompany down here, and the actual expenses sit on the 100 company code instead. So that's a nice scenario where one parent entity would take the AP, they process and manage the AP, and then the child entity is the one that actually incurs the expense. Now, let's say there's another scenario where instead of, let's say it was just $180, let's say it was something that I wanted to spread across lots of different companies instead. Well, one option would be to come in here and say, okay, 100 or company 100 is going to take this cost, and let's say company code 200. And then I'll come down here and I'll choose 1 and 180 and so on and so forth. And I can create lines for each one of my different companies and have them record their expense and their share and things. Now, this works. It's an option. However, it's a little cumbersome and it's a little redundant as well, just to change this company code every time. What if instead we could take, I'll say delete line. What if we could take this and automatically allocate this one line across multiple different entities? Fortunately, we can do that. So let's say entity 100, come over here. There is a field called allocation template. Now this is a native functionality, but MEM actually enhances this a little bit more. So we've got different distributions for what is split out. You can create these once and apply it to multiple different GL accounts. I know a lot of other systems don't let you do that, but you can, this allocation here is not tied to a specific GL account. You can allocate and set up your ratios and apply it to really any different GL account, which is great. So we'll take this. This is a 5-way split between the 5 different entities. And so now let me actually change this to something, let's do 180 times 5 instead. So 900. And let's do the preview posting here. And what we should see is now a lot of GL entries. And what the system did is it took it, let's again sort it accordingly here. Let's actually filter it down to just our parent entity. So what does the parent entity see on this transaction? Well, first thing that they see is obviously the full AP amount, right? They're the ones in the header. That is who it needs to be split out by. Next, they see their share of the travel expenses. So this was $180. It actually does need to sit on their books for $180, right? Because there was an even 5-way split between all 5 entities. They need to record some of the expense. However, what happens to the other 4 chunks of the allocation? They hit the intercompany accounts. So you can see each one of these is separate. I see 000 due from 100, 200, 300, and 999. So this is what the parent entity sees. And then if we clear the filter and take a look at 100, for example, we will see very simply, here's the expense and here's the liability. Here's the, this is for their individual section, for their individual portion of the allocation. Again, looking at it for 100, 200, 300, and 999. They all share part of that expense. So by simply setting that one field, look, we've got 14 different GL entries that get created by only having one line on our purchase invoice. So really powerful feature with this allocation templates. You can set up as many different ones as you would like. You can default them for different vendors. Lots of different things that you can do with these allocation templates. And it really saves a lot of time, especially with your allocation of expenses. All right, so that is purchasing. Let's jump over quickly to the sales side. Yes, I do want to exit. Let's go to sales and let's create a sales order instead of sales invoices. Now, one thing that you can do as well, this is really just we've just been kind of looking at parent-child relationships, right? Where you might have some due tos and due froms. Now, let's say you have an organization that might have actual due tos and due froms and purchasing from one entity to another. So if we go over, let's take a look at our customer list first. What you can do is you can set up customers inside of Business Central or inside of MEM specifically that are tied to specific entities. So if we go look at this intercompany customer here, we can see there is an intercompany entity associated with this customer. So when I am buying something, or in this case, I'm going to make a sales order, it's a customer, I can choose this customer card listed here, and it is going to be associated with this entity, and it is as if the parent entity is buying something from another entity, right? And let me show you how that would work. So we'll come back here to our sales, go to sales orders. I will create a new sales order here. Again, it's asking me for my default entity. All right, the customer name, who am I going to buy this from? I'm going to buy it from Renaissance Music. So this customer is set up with one of those intercompany codes. So we'll come down here, we'll choose our item, good old Athens desk here. As for a location, I'll say location blue, and I'm just going to buy one of these. Keep things simple. Right. So nothing too crazy here. No intercompany directly on this transaction here. Our company code in the header and company code in the line are going to be the exact same. So nothing too crazy. Now, if I go to post and preview posting, again, same thing here. Nothing is going to look too crazy. We do have quite a few GL entries simply because it's inventory and there's taxes associated with it. So you're going to see lots of extra GL entries, but there's no intercompany going on here. Because these two entities are separate, are actually being treated as two entirely separate entities listed here. So one of the coolest features, though, as I will show you right now, is if I choose post, I will choose ship an invoice. It's asking me a very important question here and a very powerful question. The sales order is created with an intercompany customer. Do you want to create a purchase order using the intercompany entity of the customer? You're going to say yes. So by posting this sales order here, it is now going to go and create a purchase order for me with the same exact information here for that individual vendor. So it looks kind of funky and it doesn't make an awful lot of sense because it's all happening inside of the same company, inside of Business Central. But if we go over here to purchasing and we'll look at the purchase orders, we will see that, let's go down here, there is now a brand new purchase order here for this Athens desk. Quantity of one, all the information that's going to be tied to that is going to be brought over here. And we can even see here, there's an IC doc number, so an intercompany doc number. What is the sales order that created this purchase order from the intercompany perspective? It's this right here. So these two documents are now tied to one another. So really powerful feature if you do have companies buying and selling from one another. inside of your organization. There's no real do to do from. They're separately managed. There's AP and AR type with the two of them, but you need to manage them, keep the books. You can do that all within MEM as well. Great. So last thing I want to take a look at is that was basically the sales and purchasing side. There's lots of, like I said, MEM touches every single aspect of Business Central, and I could spend hours and hours and hours talking about them. I just want to hit the highlights, the finance, the purchasing, the sales, things like that. Last thing that we wanted, the other areas that it touches on are going to be projects it's related to, your inventory is related to, your manufacturing is related to, fixed assets it's related to, cash management, your bank accounts it's related to. So it really touches and overhauls the entire system of Business Central, and it's a really great piece of software. So last thing I wanted to show is reporting. This is all great. We can put in all this information, have it tied to our GL, automatically create intercompany transactions and things like that. But ERPs at the end of the day are fancy databases. So what's the point of putting in all this really good information and data if we can't get it out? So let's take a look at really the heart of it, which would be our Gen Ledger entries. So if we go over to our Gen Ledger entries, essentially what it does, I'll sort this by entry number so we get our most recent ones here. All right. So what MEM does is, because it overhauls your first global dimension, any of your regular reporting functionality that you're used to by leveraging dimensions, you have available to you in MEM as well. So here we've got that first column, that company code, that is going to be required for every single GL transaction in the system. So no matter what GL transaction you're hitting, no matter what module it's coming from, that company code is going to be a required field. It is going to be absolutely mandatory across the system. So MEM also has its own version of many different reports. So if we go instead over here to the chart of accounts, give me a second here. MEM creates its own version of many of these reports, and sometimes it adjusts the layout of those reports. Sometimes it simply just adds an entity filter onto the page for you. I'll give Business Central a second here. This is a sandbox environment that I just spun up, so it's being a little bit slow. But if we come over here to reports, give this a second here, you'll see these reports. If you look in the background, you'll see all of these look just like your normal Business Central options for your reports here on your chart of accounts. You got a basic chart of accounts listing. You got a trial balance, spreading global periods, spreading dimensions, looking at your various account schedules. I'll give this a second. I may need to refresh the page if this doesn't come back. There we go. All right, so we've got our chart of accounts. If we go to reports and we run, let's say, trial balance, spread global dimensions. I just picked a report here at random. Give it a second. Again, I apologize. The database is being a little slow in this environment. What we'll see is we'll actually see the MEM version of this report. And when I say MEM creates its own version of the reports, it creates versions of almost every single report in the system. And this allows you to filter on a specific entity. So if you need to run an aged AP by entity, or an aged AR by entity, a trial balance by entity, anything like that that you'd need to, MEM is going to have available. So again, a lot of the reports might actually already have that native functionality by just being able to filter on dimension. However, if it doesn't, MEM adds that functionality for you. So pretty much any report in the system is going to be able to have that functionality. All right. There we go. So you can see up here in this report request screen, it is actually a MEM trial balance spread global dimension. So what it does is it has all of these native options. It looks just like your normal MEM trial balance that you're used to, but it has an option down here for your company filter now as well. So if you wanted to take this report and filter it by a specific company, then you can do that. If you want to run it by a specific entity, you're more than welcome to do that. So pretty much any report in the system, you're going to be able to filter and run by company. All right. So that was it. That's a high-level overview of MEM and how it works with Business Central. Again, lots of things that I didn't have time to touch upon. Lots of different setup that we can do related to security, permissions, and things like that. Lots of intricacies in the purchasing module and the sales module. Really, however your business or operation operates, MEM can be a great fit for it. Where MEM shines is really when you're managing large entity or a large number of entities. You can have as many different entities as you want. Usually the threshold between intercompany and MEM is usually about 4 or 5, and it depends on the organization and the business model. If you have one company that's your primary company and another company that's just a landholding entity and you make 1 or 2 journal entries in it per month, MEM might not be a great fit. You don't necessarily need the intercompany and the extra management. You can do that with Native Business Central. Just switch companies to make those few entries, and then you could do some consolidated reporting. But if you're doing 3 or 4 entities even, and you're doing intercompany transactions and you're finding yourself having to switch back and forth between companies pretty often, MEM can be a really great fit, and it's honestly really affordable for what it is. So if you're curious, if you want to know more, feel free to leave a comment or feel free to reach out. We've got our email in terms of how to reach out to us down here in the descriptions. So feel free to reach out if you have specific questions. We'd be more than happy to answer those. Or if you'd like to see more about MEM, feel free to reach out. Again, leave comments if there's anything in particular that you would like to see more of a deep dive on. But really appreciate your time running through this, and I hope you guys have a great day.